All right, sweet, it's working. Well, let me close a few things down and put up the presentation and we'll get started. So I'm just going to be going over chapter 1 of the 7th edition ServSafe Manager. Can be used as just a supplemental audio or visual guide for when studying for the test. And throughout the presentation, I'll be giving some testing tips and things that will for sure be on the test and you need to know. So anyway, I highly recommend using the book as a guide throughout this presentation just to help get a visual presentation, an audio presentation, also have the actual book so you know exactly what you need to study. Okay, so let's dive in. So what is a foodborne illness? Well, a foodborne illness is basically a disease transmitted to people by food. And foodborne illness outbreak is categorized when 2 or more people have the same symptom after eating the same food. Now, to be appropriately called a foodborne illness outbreak, it requires an investigation by authority and confirmation by a lab. And I guess the strange thing about it is that most go unreported, even though there are over millions of foodborne illnesses cases per year. But those who have been reported have taught us a lot and given us a lot of insights about what we can do to change the procedural practices and what we can do to prevent further outbreaks from happening. So what are the challenges to ensure food safety? Well, there's time. The pressure to work quickly is a big one. Language and culture, literacy and education, pathogens, unapproved suppliers, high-risk population, and staff turnover. The cost of foodborne illness in the United States basically, I think, costs them billions of dollars each year. The National Restaurant Association show that foodborne illness outbreaks can cost the operation thousands of dollars by loss of customer sales, loss of reputation, negative media exposure, lowered staff morale, lawsuits and legal fees, staff missing work, increased insurance premium, and staff retraining. So you can see food safety is super, super important to the success of any food industry business. Because if you have a case where a child dies from your restaurant, you might go out of business. I mean, it's a very good possibility. And the most important cost is always the human life involved in the illness. Our priority needs to be protecting people because we don't want people to lose work. We don't want to push them into very expensive medical costs. And death and disability, we don't want to wish that on anyone. So practicing our foodborne illness safety procedures can prevent all of this from happening. So how do these foodborne illnesses occur? Well, they're usually are caused by contaminants, the presence of harmful substances. They can be biological. These are from pathogens, which are the greatest threat to food safety. They are viruses, parasites, fungi, bacteria. Even some plants, mushrooms, and seafood carry harmful toxins and are also included in this group. There are also chemical, which include cleaners, sanitizers, and polishes, and they're also physical, which can be glass, dirt, bag ties, even fishbone fillets, which can further lead to biological contaminants. And even though all 3 of these are a danger to food safety, biological contaminants are the most responsible for the foodborne illnesses we see in our nation. So how does food become unsafe? There are 5 common food handling mistakes that I have seen from personally working within the food industry. Purchasing foods from unsafe conditions. This can be, your neighbor just down the road. If they are not cooking in an industrial kitchen and following food safety procedures, it's questionable, what is in the food and if it's safe to consume. Failing to cook food correctly, holding food at incorrect temperatures, using contaminated equipment, practicing poor personal hygiene. And the time temperature abuse is a major one. It's actually caused very, very severe illnesses and deaths if especially meats are not cooked all the way through. Which means like food is not held or stored at correct temperature. Failing to cook food correctly. That's just like a big deal. Food is not cooked or reheated enough to kill pathogens. food is not cooled correctly. Cross-contamination happens when pathogens are transferred from one surface of the food to another, and it causes foodborne illnesses in many ways. Contaminated ingredients are added to food that receives no further cooking. Ready-to-eat food touches contaminated surface. Contaminated food touches or drips fluid onto cooked or ready-to-eat food. A food handler touches contaminated food and then touches ready-to-eat food. Contaminated cleaning cloths touch food contact surfaces. Poor personal hygiene causes a lot of foodborne illnesses if the food handlers do not, follow the correct procedures. These actions include fail to wash hands correctly. Correctly is a key word there. There is a proper procedure to wash hands. After restroom usage, cough or sneeze on the food, touch or scratch wounds and then touch food, or work while ill. Pathogens can also be spread to food if poor cleaning and sanitizing procedures are in place. This can happen in the following ways. Utensils and equipment are not properly washed, rinsed, and sanitized between use. Food contact surfaces are wiped clean rather than being washed, rinsed, and sanitized. Wiping cloths are not stored in a sanitizer solution between uses. Sanitizing solutions are not at the required levels to sanitize objects. And also, let's go over a few TCS foods. These are time temperature control for safety. These are foods most likely to become unsafe for consumption if they are not kept within their time temperature control limits. And don't get them confused with like fresh produce, because I've seen test questions have, make you want to choose between a TCS food and like a strawberry. These are a little bit different than ready-to-eat foods. We have dairy and eggs, meat products, chicken, fish, shellfish, and crustaceans, baked potatoes, heat-treated plant foods such as cooked rice, beans, and vegetables, tofu or other soy protein, and this can include synthetic ingredients such as textured soy protein in meat alternatives, sliced melons, cut tomatoes, cut leafy greens, sprouts and sprout seeds. The reason why this one is a red flag because these require a moist, warm environment in order to grow. And also untreated garlic and oil mixtures. Now, ready-to-eat foods are foods that can be eaten without further preparation, washing, or cooking, such as, even sugar, spices, and seasonings are another example of ready-to-eat foods, and also veggies and plants that are ready to eat, and deli meats. Who exactly is considered at high risk for foodborne illnesses? These are elderly people due to the low stomach acid production, and food seems to sit in your stomach a lot longer if you have lower stomach acid production. This allows fermentation and toxins to be released in a lot higher concentrations due to longer sitting time. This also includes preschool-age children who don't really have like very strong immune systems. And this also includes people with compromised immune systems such as chemotherapy patients, HIV and AIDS, and transplant patients. Because people who have transplant procedures must take medications to prevent the body from rejecting the new organ or bone marrow. Here are some key practices for ensuring food safety like a boss. If you follow these practices, you are a superhero to the general public and people around you. Buy from reputable suppliers, follow time temp control procedures, prevent cross-contamination, show great personal hygiene, and always clean and sanitize. If you are the manager, food safety is ultimately your responsibility. Make sure the food is not prepared in a private home or in a room where people are living or sleeping. People other than food handlers are restricted from prep, storage, and dishwashing areas. If other people are allowed in these areas, steps are taken to protect food, utensils, and equipment from contamination. Maintenance and delivery workers must follow food safety practices while in operation. The inspection of deliveries, and then hand washing must be monitored. The inspection of deliveries must be monitored to ensure that food is received from an appropriate approved source, the correct temperature, and has not been contaminated. And food delivery after hours must be monitored to make sure it is received from an approved source, stored in the correct location, protected from contamination, and is accurately presented. Food handlers are monitored to make sure TCS foods are cooked to required temperatures. Temperatures must be checked using calibrated thermometers. And food handlers are also responsible for monitoring to make sure that TCS foods are cooled rapidly as well. Consumer advisories are posted notifying guests of the risk of ordering raw or partially cooked food. Cleaning and sanitizing procedures are monitored to make sure that sanitizer solutions are at the correct temperature and the concentration and remain in contact with the item for the correct amount of time. You also must notify the guest when they must use clean tableware when returning to self-serve areas and buffets. And also when staff are handling ready-to-eat foods, make sure they're using appropriate utensils or single-use gloves. Make sure the staff are trained in food safety, including allergy awareness. Also, the staff, including conditional staff, are reporting illnesses and symptoms of illnesses that can be transmitted through food. This is even like the common cold. If you're sick, don't go to work. Also, have the food safety procedures printed out, implemented, and maintained where required by the regulatory authority. So as a food service manager, you've got to be proud of your food safety. Be open to market it. Offer training courses and evaluate and update them as needed. Be open to discussing food safety expectations. Document food handling procedures and update them as needed. Consider awarding certificates for training and small rewards for good food safety. And set an example by following all food safety rules yourself. And it's also super important to show well-groomed hygiene and accurately answer all food safety questions. So in review, we went over foodborne illness, how it's transmitted to people, what is considered an outbreak, and how often and how helpful it is for us to know. Some of the challenges that operations may face in promoting food safety. The foodborne illness to both the guests and the operation, the 3 types of contaminants, food handlers who do not follow correct procedures, and how they can be a threat to the safety of the food, the time temperature abuse, the pathogens that can be transferred, and the proper sanitation and cleaning, how important that is. We also went over TCS foods and ready-to-eat foods and those types. Those will for sure be on the test. Know them. And we also went over a few of the high-risk populations. These will probably be on the test as well. So keep in mind the preschool age, the elderly, and very ill people with cancer or on chemotherapy. Also, we also went over some pretty important preventive measures for keeping food safe, such as controlling time and temperature, preventing cross-contamination, practicing good personal hygiene, purchasing from approved, reputable suppliers, and cleaning and sanitizing items correctly. So if you have the book, please go check the end of the chapter for study questions. We have apply your knowledge questions, some scenarios and questions, and also some study questions, which for the ServSafe, you can also find some awesome resources online and practice questions for the test. But so far, chapter 1 seems to be a very short, easy chapter. The next one that we're going to be getting into is the micro world. It's a little bit longer, and a little bit more challenging because you have to memorize certain bacteria and the symptoms and the sources from which they are from. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you in chapter 2.